Hey guys, I'm Jeremy, and here's some advice if you're ever considering hiking the Appalachian Trail. This could probably be helpful whether you're going to go and be a through hiker or a section hiker. I did the trail about 21 years ago now, so I was a little thinner then than I am now. But one of the most amazing trips I've done, and I've done a lot of cool trips around the world, and that still might be my favorite of all of them. So if you don't know what the Appalachian Trail is, it's a 2,180-mile trail from Georgia all the way up to Maine on the east coast of the United States. And it's one of the longest marked trails in the world. They started working on it about 100 years ago, and the first guy did it in 1948, this guy Earl Schaefer. And it's been popular now for like 50, 60 years or something like that. And every 8 miles or so, they have shelters along the way you can stay at, or lean-tos. So altogether, there's like 250 of them. So it's a really awesome trip. If you're really out for a cool adventure, it's one of the best you could do out there in the whole world, in my opinion. So I'll give you some information on the gear, routes to take, dealing with animals, resupplying, and generally ways to improve your chances of succeeding on this trip, because many people do quit. So I hope some of this advice can help you. So the first thing I'd say is to go out and actually go hiking for like 2, 3, 4 weeks at least, because 75% of the people who attempt a through hike are going to quit. And I think about half quit in the first week or two. And that's because, it was much different than many people's expectations. Like, I've talked to some people who thought it was just going to be on a ridge and like hardly any ups and downs. Other people get injured, other people just get bored with it. But you shouldn't spend all this money and, quit your job and get out there and quit within 2 or 3 days. I mean, I remember when I got to one of the first roads, it's like, yeah, people were waiting to get picked up because it wasn't what they expected. So definitely do a 2, 3, 4 week trip. I did the whole state of Maine, which is one of the hardest states, when I was 18, before I went in the Army, and I learned a ton then. I mean, when I went out there with like, canned food, like a heavy book, heavy pots and pans and stuff, and all of this heavy gear that I didn't need.
What's up?
What do you guys think of the hill so far?
I think it's fucking nothing. Shit, nothing.
And so when I got on the trail a few years later, I was definitely much better off and much better prepared. Now, with that even being said, by the time you finish the trail, you might even have all new gear again, because you're going to want to get all the ultralight stuff. You're going to want like one titanium pot, an ultralight tent, or an ultralight tarp. So if it's possible and you have the extra money, I would definitely recommend just getting all the ultralight gear you can get. A light backpack, a light tent or tarp tent, a light sleeping bag, a light, a titanium pot. Everything you want is going to be the lightest thing, because you're going to get obsessed with weight. I know most people use Kindles nowadays, but like if you had a book with you, you'd rip out the pages. With your toothbrush, you'll cut it in half. Like, you'll get crazy about weight, because all day you've got this heavy backpack on you, and you're going to want to get that as light as possible. So if you can't afford it, just get the lightest gear you can. Now, don't compromise your safety. Like, if you're starting in February in Georgia and it's snowing, you don't want to go out there in shorts and a t-shirt and nothing. You could die of hypothermia. So you definitely want to have some winter gear, especially if you're starting at that time down south, or at any other time of the year where it might be like winter or snowing or cold rain even. So I started around 35 pounds, and I think most people try to get to about 25 pounds, at least in the summer months. Obviously in the winter you have warmer clothes and things like that, and a warmer sleeping bag, so you've got an extra 5 pounds or so. I thought the tarp tent was lighter and a little better. You could just use like one hiking pole to keep up the whole tarp, and then you could put a tarp on the ground. Bugs could get in on the side, but that was only like a pound for the top layer, and the layer on the bottom was, a quarter pound or something, so that's super light. I had a Montbell sleeping bag that was only about a pound. My pack at that time was a little large. I think what a lot of people got were the Osprey backpacks. Those seemed like they were smaller, and they could get up to, like 25 pounds, which is kind of where you want to be at. But I'm sure there's tons of other stuff out there. I used a pop can stove. You basically could just make it out of like a Coca-Cola can and poke holes around it and use denatured alcohol. That was pretty much the smallest thing you could get and the lightest one. And then just, one pair of like extra clothes and a light rain jacket. You don't need heavy boots. You could use trail shoes. People assume you need heavy boots to like have better ankle support, and I'm sure that's true, but heavy boots are definitely more cumbersome and you could trip more. And so it's good to have lighter feet. And once you're in shape after 2-3 weeks, like your ankles and feet and legs in general are really strong and pretty durable. So I'd rather have light feet and move faster than heavy boots. Because like when your ankle rolls and stuff, if you're in good shape, like you should be okay for the most part. You know, I would use like heavier boots if there's like some snow or something like that, but I would switch over to trail shoes as soon as you could. Definitely have hiking poles. I remember the first time I saw people with that in Maine, I was like, what are you guys doing? Are you going skiing? It looks so dumb to me, but having hiking poles is super helpful. I mean, it keeps you to have better balance so you don't like fall over if you're going to trip or something like that. They're good when you're trying to go through creeks and like, you know, walk across rocks. They take a lot of pressure off your knees, especially when you're going downhill. I know my knees were killing me when I was in Maine because I didn't have hiking poles, and you've got the weight of your whole body going downhill all day with, you know, a 35, 40-pound pack, and your knees are going to get shot pretty fast. It is a weird thing to get used to at first, but it's like, why have 2 legs when you could have like 4 legs? You know, it takes, I don't know, maybe 20, 30% off your legs, so you're just using more strength basically. I would get gaiters. Gaiters are the things that go around like the bottom of your boot and cover your ankle basically. And that's because when you're walking all day, a lot of like little twigs and rocks get into your boot. And when you're walking, then you have to take off your boot because you've got these little rocks. It's really annoying. So that stops all of the debris from getting down into your trail shoe or whatever. So which way should you go, north or south? I think most people go north. You know, I think like 90% of the people start in Georgia and go north. They usually start in February or March, right when winter's ending. When I did it, we still had some cold weather. It wasn't snowing or anything, but yeah, the first 2 to 3 weeks were definitely a little cold. There's definitely a lot more people going that way. So if you want more solitude, you might be better off going southbound in the summer. But then again, you're going to hit all the northbound people like halfway through your trip, or like, I don't know, I guess 2 or 3 months into your trip. You're going to get a huge rush of people. And there's a lot of section hikers and stuff, so you're not really going to be able to avoid people totally anyway, unless like maybe you hike in winter or something like that. Of course, section hiking could be a good idea too. You know, 6 months is a long time and people could get bored. Maybe doing just, you know, 2 or 3 weeks every year for several years could be a good idea. No shame in that. I know sometimes people who thru hike have kind of a big ego, like they're great because they're doing the whole thing. But if you like section hiking more, go for it. Anything's a good idea, whatever makes you happy. I know some people go out there with time restraints. I wouldn't go out there if you've got a big time restraint. It creates a lot of stress mentally and physically. I know I started off like that because I wanted to go to college in fall, so I think I had to be school towards the end of August. So I had like 4.5 months to finish a trail. And so when I started, I was with, you know, some people I liked and they were really cool, but I had to keep going ahead of them because I was on that time restraint and I was rushing the whole time. And eventually I just changed my plans. I said, you know what, I'll delay that semester of school and then I'll go in January. And then that fall I ended up going to Europe anyway. So I would definitely not have a time restraint. A lot of the other people were really stressed out about making that time, and like maybe they were a little bit sore, but they knew they had to keep going, and then they got injured, and then they're off the trail for 2 weeks anyway, and then by the time they got on the trail, then they're even more stressed out. So I really think keeping your options pretty open is a good idea. So, I mean, if you had like a 5-month time constraint, that's not too bad, but I wouldn't go any less than 5 months if possible. So obviously hiking 6 months is a long time, and that's really tough mentally for a lot of people, obviously. And so I think a good strategy to have is just think of getting to the next town or supply point. So in other words, instead of like, you know, because there's going to be days where like you're going to be sore, you're going to be bored, it's going to be raining, you're going to be cold and wet, and your tent gets wet. It's just, it could be really overwhelming, and you could think, God, I've got 5 more months of being outside, you know, with all these mosquitoes around you and stuff. And so just think of just getting to the next point. So I took the trail like 3 to 5 days at a time, because that's how long it is till you get to like the next town, basically. Usually like 3-4 days or so. And so you just get to that next town, You get your batteries recharged because you could go to a hotel, you could go to a decent restaurant, you could have some beers, and then you leave town, and you've just got 2 or 3 days to the next place, basically. If you keep concentrating on, oh, God, I've got 4.5 months left, I've got 3 months, I think that's why a lot of people quit. So just get to the next point. Don't look so far ahead. And so now another thing you could do is you can, if you want to get this trail done as fast as possible, the fastest guy I think did it in, 45 days or something like that. And, many other people could do it in like 3 to 4 months. And, that might be great because you're getting the accomplishment you wanted to get done. But the problem is like, to me at least, I'm much more social. I like the social aspect of being on the Appalachian Trail. You don't have many experiences where you could travel for many months where everyone, or at least most of the people, are going in the same direction every day. Like you might go backpacking in Europe for a couple months, and you'll run into people, and maybe you will travel the whole time. But generally speaking, you're going to meet other travelers who are like, you meet in Munich, Germany, and then you're going to the Czech Republic, they're going up to Belgium, and another person's going down to Italy. So this is like an amazing experience where like a couple thousand people set out around the same time and are all trying to achieve the same goal. Of course, some people go slower and faster, but you meet hundreds of people and sit around a fire and laugh and joke and have beers and smoke pot. And so you're going to meet some of the best friends in your life, and some people even got into relationships and got married later. So if you're really into the social aspect, it's an amazing thing. If you don't like people at all, I couldn't say I wouldn't recommend the AT, but there is a lot of people. I think I only camped 1 or 2 nights out of 6 months where I was alone, and that was it. Now, of course, I usually sought out places where people might be, like a shelter or a campground or something like that. But if you really want to avoid people, it might be a little difficult. Of course, you don't need to go to any of those shelters or campgrounds. You could go kind of in the middle of nowhere, or you could do it kind of in an off-season or like winter, but if you really don't want to see people or anything like that, you might want to do like the PCT or the Continental Divide or other trails around the world or something like that. I know it's hard, but don't be on social media all the time on the trail. I know we all like to check our social media, and like I'm making these videos too and busy doing this kind of stuff, but I did Trail Magic a few years ago in either Connecticut or Massachusetts, and of course everyone has smartphones now and tablets and whatnot. We didn't have anything like that back in the day. The fact I even brought my video camera was really crazy, because that was an extra like 3 pounds that no one would have considered bringing out.
You're toting that thing around,
Yep.
Yeah, he is.
and you're not willing to carry my pack for a Snickers bar?
Yeah, right.
And so, I did this Trail Magic. We made some burgers and we had some beers and hung out. And of course, 2 or 3 people hung out with us. But then a lot of people ate, and then they went back to their tent and they watched a movie. And, that's cool. To each their own, but when I was on the trail, you kind of hung out with anyone. There wasn't much else to do. And I thought that was cool. Like, because you could be on social media or watch movies on any time you want. And I thought getting out there and meeting all these interesting people was cool, because you're meeting all these kind of people, not just from the States, but around the world. And, some of them are weirdos, some of them are a little crazy, but it kind of makes it fun to meet all these random people. Yeah, of course, you're going to meet some people you don't like or whatever, so understandable if you don't want to hike with some people or see people all the time you don't enjoy very much. But yeah, don't just go to your tent every day and be on your phone. That seems a little odd to me. But to each their own, of course. Also, enjoy the other people on the trail who aren't through hiking, because like I said, a lot of through hikers have the big ego. Plus, it's normal when you meet another person, you'll ask them like, oh, are you through hiking? And most people want to meet or hang out or socialize more with people who are through hiking, because there's more of a chance that you're going to see them again. And there might be just a guy out there for the weekend with his son, or a section hikers who's only out there for 3 or 4 days. And so I felt like sometimes the through hikers would like not make an effort to really talk to those people as much. And it's understandable, but I actually enjoyed the section hikers in many ways, because the through hikers, after a few months, got really burned out, generally speaking. Like I said, I was full of energy. I was 22. I didn't even want the trail to end. I was like, man, I'm just smoking pot, drinking, hiking in the woods. It wasn't super difficult for me at that age. Obviously now it'd be a little tougher, but those through hikers were excited to hike and excited to chat and, hang out, where a lot of through hikers get kind of bitter. They just kind of go back, and you could just tell they set out to do it and they don't want to quit. And so they will finish, but they were not enjoying it. So if I saw those people around, I was like, hey, there's a section hiker here. Hey, let's hang out and have a drink or talk. And so don't feel like, you're better than anyone and you should ignore other people that are on the trail. So as far as general difficulty, of course, when you start the trail, unless you're like in great shape, it's going to be really tough for 2 to 3 weeks until you're in decent shape. And in that time, you're going to get a ton of blisters. And I even lost my toenail because, and that's another thing you got to remember, make sure that you trim your toenails, because you're going to be kicking against rocks all day by accident. And like eventually, if your nail's not trimmed, it's going to break and it's going to come off, and that's super painful. It's even worse, much worse than a blister. So make sure your nails are trimmed. But yeah, so this first 2 to 3 weeks are going to be tough. The hardest sections of the trail is the southern area and the northern area. The middle area isn't too bad. So basically, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia is pretty tough, especially because you're most likely starting there. And then the other harder part would be like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And as far as elevation goes, Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont might not be much different than the South, but the terrain up there is pretty rugged. Like there's a lot more rocks that are different shapes and roots coming out of the ground that you might trip on. So, I mean, you'll probably be in decent shape, but it is a little bit more rugged up that way. The center areas like Maryland, PA, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, those, still have quite a lot of ups and downs. I mean, don't think it's flat by any means, but no really big climbs. And I actually kind of got injured when I got to Vermont because I was going at such a fast pace in the flatter areas that when I got to Vermont, I was trying to still keep that pace, but there were larger ups and downs, and I ended up getting like tendonitis or something. So be careful when you get back up to those bigger mountains that you still pace yourself. As far as age goes, obviously if you're younger, it's going to be easier. I was 22, and the guys who were like, in their 40s or 50, you could tell it was maybe twice as hard. It would take them maybe not twice as long, but quite a bit longer than us, younger guys, because they would start, like 6, 7 o'clock, and we would start maybe 9 or 10. We were drinking and in town, and we'd get to the shelter before them. And the same goes, especially the guys that were like in their 60s or 70s. Like one guy was called full moon walking because he had to start every morning super early, and he wouldn't get to the shelter until it was dark, basically. So I wouldn't discourage anyone who's older to do it. Totally do it. It's super enjoyable, but it's definitely going to be a lot easier when you're younger, obviously. So as far as getting food, there's 2 main things people do. Like what I did was I just got a resupply in every town that I got to. And you get to towns every 3 to 5 days on average. And so you get to a town, there's usually like a small store. You get your ramen noodles and like this tuna fish packet or some basic things, right? And at 22 years old, I didn't really mind that much. That, the food I was eating on the trail was pretty basic. I'd usually leave town with like, let's say a Subway sandwich. So at least the first day I would have some good food, and then like for the next day and a half or 2 I would just kind of have like crappier food, and then when I get to town, it's just like cheeseburgers and beer and good food, right? Lasagna, whatever. And so now that I'm older, I would definitely not want to eat like mediocre food. I would probably mail boxes to all the post offices along the way. And so you could either buy better food in advance, like the freeze-dried stuff, or however they make those, like Mountain House. There's several different brands out there. Now, those are kind of expensive. They're $10 to $15, but at least you're getting some decent food. If you have the extra time and you're a pretty good cook, like myself, I would make the food at home and I would freeze dry it. So there's 2 main ways you could dry food. You could either dehydrate it, which that could preserve it, I guess, up to, a few weeks or a few months, and you lose quite a bit of nutrients and a bit of the taste and texture. If you freeze dry it, it's like 99% the same as far as nutrients. But the thing is, if you freeze dry stuff, The machine that does that's like $2,000-$3,000, so that's out of most people's budget. Where a regular dehydrator is, you can get one for like $75 or something like that. So yeah, that's up to you how much you want to plan that in advance. That would be quite a bit of planning to mail everything and cook and everything in advance. So you might just want to wing it and just kind of get food along the way. And you could always get good meals in towns. I generally never had any problems with hitchhiking. Some of the trail goes right through many towns, which is the most convenient. And then other times you'll have to hitchhike. I don't remember waiting more than 10 or 20 minutes. I mean, there might be a couple spots where you might have to wait like a half hour or something like that, but I think that's kind of rare. Generally, the locals in those areas are used to picking up hikers and dropping them off in town. In all those towns, you've got like either campgrounds or hostels that are pretty cheap and a few restaurants and things to do. So it's pretty cool. Those towns are generally pretty nice and great places to hang out for a couple days. As far as animals go, I don't think that's generally a big issue. I have seen some, bears and snakes and deer and all kinds of animals, but getting attacked is pretty rare. It's like, 1 in a million chance. You could bring something like pepper spray or mace or something like that, but that's extra weight you don't want to bring. So if you bang pots and pans together or something like that, you should be able to scare away bears. Obviously, don't go around like a mother with her cubs or something like that. I filmed, 3 cubs and a mother when I was around, New Jersey. Because the area of New Jersey is pretty small, so all the bears are in just a small area. And later that day, I saw a bear actually eating a deer, which was pretty crazy. I assume a hunter probably had shot the deer and it was wounded, and then the bear had found the deer, I'm guessing. If you are going to stay in the shelters, you should definitely check them out and look for any snakes or anything like that, because that's a nice place for them to sleep. So you definitely don't want to get in and, find out that there's a dangerous snake sleeping next to you. It's great to listen to music on the trail, but you also won't be able to hear an animal or a rattlesnake or something like that. So it's up to you if you want to listen to music, but there is some risk with that. You won't be able to hear everything around you. So should you usually camp or stay in shelters? Of course, that's up to you. Some people wanted to always stay in shelters because they didn't want to bring a tent for the extra weight. But I think shelters kind of suck for a couple reasons. For one, especially if it's raining, most people will want to stay in a shelter so they could get really crowded. And of course, all the people around you, like 2 or 3 people at least, are going to be snoring. And then there's tons of like mice and other little critters that stay in there also. So when you're sleeping at night, you can hear the mice and stuff running around in the shelters or below where you're sleeping. And then people get up super early. Like maybe at the time I did it, I wanted to get up at, let's say 8 o'clock and leave at 9 or whatever. Some of the people, especially the older people, usually get up at like 6 and they'll start cooking and doing things kind of right near where you're sleeping, and you can hear the pots and pans moving around. So if it's not raining or anything, I'd recommend still going to the shelters just for the social aspect, but I would just camp nearby, and that's a much better sleep in my opinion. In general, you don't need a water filter most of the time, but there are certain times in certain areas, like you'll be in, let's say, Pennsylvania in July, and it's super hot, and it might be dry, and the water sources do get kind of a little dirty or not that good. Or same thing with ponds. You don't always come up to a creek, and you've got to go to a pond, and that's definitely not as safe. I know on my first trip, my buddy Eric had ran out of water, and so he kind of raced by me to go to the pond and just drank a bunch of water that wasn't purified. He did get giardia a couple weeks later, so you don't need to purify a lot of the time if it's coming from a spring in a lot of areas, but once in a while you do want to have the filter, so it's good to have something basic at least along the way. You definitely don't need it every day, but you will need it once in a while. Of course, water is pretty heavy, and you do need to carry water so you don't get dehydrated, obviously. So my idea was just drink a bunch before you even leave. Have 1 or 2 liters in the morning before you even take off, or if you're at a water source, and that way you don't need to carry as much along the way. but you definitely need to make sure you're hydrated and check your data books and things. There's so much resources out there where there's water and lean-tos and stuff like that. So make sure you have enough water to get you to the next water source. Generally on the trail, it's pretty good. I think, as I mentioned, some of those areas, maybe up in the middle of the states in the summer, it could get kind of dry because it's pretty hot. But I think at the beginning of the trail or at the end, it wasn't too bad. Want to have some basic DEET or some insect repellent, because obviously in certain areas the bugs get pretty bad in the summer. So especially if you have a tarp tent without a screen or something like that, or you're in the shelter, there's no door or screen over most of those, so you're definitely going to have a lot of mosquitoes getting in your ears when you're trying to sleep, or black flies. So you're definitely going to have to bring some insect repellent for parts of the trip. This trip was amazing, and I've done a lot of cool stuff. I mean, I've biked around the world. I've done commercial fishing in Alaska. I've done motorcycle trips in China and many other countries in Asia. And this was definitely one of my favorite. And one of the reasons is because I was 22. I just got out of the military, so I felt like I was just getting out of jail, basically. And at that time, you just want to party and have fun and meet people. So the Appalachian Trail couldn't be better. So anyway, I hope this helps. I'm sure there's a lot of things I might have forgotten. You can leave some questions below in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. I've got a lot of other things on my channel, like my bike trip around the world, commercial fishing in Alaska, my time in the Army, my time in China and Taiwan for 15 years, and living abroad. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.
The bottom line, you gotta love it, baby. And if you don't love it, then get the fuck off of the trail. No two ifs, ands, and ways about it. Period. We love you too.